Good afternoon, everyone. Happy New Year. I'm here simply to introduce Heather. I'll be on mute and off camera in case there's a question, but I'll be taking notes. So Heather, it's all you.
Great. Good afternoon. Thank you for taking the time, especially at the very beginning of January. We're here for an important discussion today with regards to review and additional comments on the profile that I sent you all just before the holidays. I did receive some feedback via email from the chair, as well as Alan was great to contribute to that. And Latricia also contributed from an equity standpoint. So wanted to be able to maybe chair walk section by section and determine if there's additional changes. And then based on input from the board, we can then look at the timeline to determine if we need a second review or if we're comfortable approving the changes as discussed and continuing to move forward on our timeline as it exists currently. Does that work for you, Chair?
Yeah, I know.
Great.
I've had the opportunity to see Latricia's comments as well. I think she replied all. I haven't seen Alan's comments, but you'll take us through it. That's great.
Great. So first section is the opportunity section, really the kind of nuts and bolts of the position. Chair, I know that you had some changes. Alan also contributed to that to kind of streamline. For those of you that haven't seen those changes, it was the county council office and staff providing services to the departments and the board. We had some information in there about residents. It was more in broadly serving the residents, but I recognize that it was the way that it was written was a little confusing. So the recommendation was to take out that component and just supporting the internal operations of the county, the staff, the departments, and the board. Are there any questions or concerns about those pieces? Great. The second part of that was developing and implementing the strategic plan and collaborating with staff on annual work plans. That was more specific to the county council's office strategic plan, not the county-wide strategic plan. So I can certainly make some adjustments to that language to differentiate between the two, making sure that it's not that they're developing the countywide strategic plan.
We're just adding the word department.
Yeah, or office, since it's technically recognized as an office. So that's, I think, a simple adjustment. Are there other changes in that section from those of you that I haven't already heard from? Does, any of the other board members?
I thought what I liked about it was the readability of the document. The fact that it was it wasn't just these duties include, but it was very readable, and I appreciated that. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Alan had also made a note comment that we should add supervises a team of veteran attorneys and support staff. I did want to, one, recognize that. Thank you, Alan, but also note that I had that in the office of the county council, and I was trying not to necessarily duplicate efforts. So I can certainly, depending upon the board's recommendation, move it to the position or keep it. The sentence in the office says the office also, let's see, is staffed by a talented and dedicated group of employees led by the county council, and then it launches into the positions. So Alan did want to recognize that in the position and note that it was documented just in a different part of the profile.
Right, I'm fine with that.
I think that one of the points that Alan's comment adds is that many of the team members are veteran team members and long-serving team members. And I think that's a slightly different characteristic than the phraseology that you've currently put into the document. So I just want to ensure that that is considered as a potential change.
Okay. And we can certainly talk about that when we get to the office section, if we're comfortable and not necessarily moving it. Again, the point was to not be overly repetitive in the document. Priorities section. The chair, you had mentioned on the third bullet, adding continuously improve the office. Just an ongoing eye on continuous improvement. Are there any other thoughts and or changes, additions that you all feel are necessary in the priorities section?
I just want to ensure that Latricia's changes are not
Oh,
ignored.
yes. Sorry, I have two documents. I apologize. Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. Latricia had mentioned in the opportunity section in the very last paragraph, including implementation of civil rights laws and the American with Disabilities Act, ensuring best practices of investigation and tracking of client and employee discrimination and harassment complaints, and appropriate strategies for mitigating systemic racism and the promotion of racial equity. I apologize. I have two documents only because Latricia's didn't include Alan's. And so now side by side. So if you're comfortable with Latricia's equity, I think having that equitable focus that she was able to put throughout the document, I'll make sure and highlight those as well. So she also had, in addition to the chair's addition of continuously in the third bullet, the very last bullet, she added civil rights and then changed the order of the DEI to EDI, which I think is important to reference it appropriately as the way the county does in terms of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Any other thoughts in that section? Great. There were no changes to the successful candidate section or documented comments. I do want to make sure for those of you that I didn't hear from, if anyone else has any thoughts there that you'd like me to add and or modify in that section.
I don't have any thoughts or comments because it's pretty straightforward, but I'm a little confused. Alan, why wouldn't that just be a normal course of action? Why are we spelling out that separately versus spelling out a whole host of other things? I'm trying to understand the detail. I'm not suggesting we don't spell out the DEI, but I mean, we're getting pretty myopic here in what we're talking about.
Well, I just leave it up to the board to decide what they want and their recruitment provisions, what they're going to be looking for. I mean, it's just a matter of choice.
Because there is a lot of work to be done here in 2021 and 2022 in order to make up for the fact that organizationally we have fallen behind in this space. So we have work to catch up as well as to continue to modernize. That's why it is being given clarity and time.
And I will emphasize that is a large part of what we do is we respond to these lawsuits, prepare for these lawsuits, we educate and train, and so we do, and it's getting obviously more important with the board's priorities.
Yeah, that's helpful in both cases. I'm thinking that was the body of work we do anyway, but if the issue is that we have a body of work to do, it doesn't sound like we're spelling out that that's part of what we want to accomplish.
So it's in the priorities section.
But that's the task that anyone would do. I mean, contract review or anything else. Should there be, maybe I'm thinking this through. I understand what we're trying to accomplish, but I'm trying to say, is that an initiative versus, well, forget it. I guess it covers it.
Are you asking specifically if it's should be removed from a priority and put into just the day-to-day portions of the opportunity? Is that what you're asking, Commissioner Rogers?
The way it was spelled out there, was talked about it, we do all those kinds of things. That's not, but if it's a body of work that needs to be done, maybe I liked what the chair said a lot better than what that says, I guess. So I was just trying to understand it. Maybe it's explicit to everybody else, but to me, it just sounded like the normal routine things that we're doing versus developing a program like she was talking about. So I think that was my confusion. Let it go. I get it.
Okay.
And this is why these are work sessions, so we can work through things, not a problem. Commissioner Treese, I know you had raised your hand at one point. You're all set? Okay. So back to the successful candidate section.
Yeah, I think there were no additions and or changes from anyone. So that moves us on to the qualifications section. One addition from Latricia, which was adding civil rights. So knowledge of the principles and practices of municipal law, litigation, civil rights, and labor relations law. So just adding the civil rights component to that. Outside of that, there were no other changes and or additions that I'd received. Alan, yes.
I was looking at it again, and and I'll suggest to the board that potentially land use principles of Oregon land use would be. It's a fairly important part of our county council's job to know that. And Jackie in my office wanted to make sure that person knew a little bit about land use.
So
and Oregon is unique, so I'll lay that out there for the board to decide whether they want to add that or not.
We also have land use is just in a separate sentence. So it is federal and local statutes, regulations, rules, and ordinances applicable to county activities and functions, including municipal liability, public meetings, torts, land use, public records. So it is in there, just in a different sentence.
I should have kept reading.
No, if we need to change where it's physically located to, that's an important part of this discussion. So
we don't need our county council to be an expert in land use, but we do need our county council to have staff members who are more expert in land use.
Any other thoughts on that qualification section? And are you comfortable with the civil rights addition by Latricia?
Commissioner Willie?
Yeah, this isn't about the civil rights edition. It's the first sentence. Just for clarification, the ideal candidate will be a member of the Oregon State Bar with at least 10 years of increasing responsibility, legal experience, blah, blah, blah. Are you saying they have to be a member of the Oregon State Bar for 10 years? Because that's almost what that sounds like to me. Or at least a question in my mind as to, I know we wanted them to be a member of the Oregon State Bar.
It was a member of the bar that could be currently active or maybe inactive and could, they were in Oregon and a member of the bar and have stepped away.
A comma would help.
Yeah. So
yeah, I just felt like it was kind of a running sentence that said you got to have 10 years at the Oregon Bar. Yeah, so comma would work. Thank you.
I'll add the comma. Simple fix.
Okay, that's all I have.
Great. Anyone else? So inside Washington County, there are a couple of comments here from the chair as well as Alan. The rural acreage of Washington County far exceeds the size of the urban area of the county. The chair had added, I'm trying to figure out where it starts, Chair, so bear with me, which includes cities and urban unincorporated suburban neighborhoods. So it's a really short and sweet addition to that sentence. Everyone comfortable with that? Great. Any other changes inside Washington County section? Great. That leads us to the Office of the County Council, specifically the sentence, the second sentence, the office.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I forgot to ask. The second paragraph has a lot of good data. I'm just wondering, and Alan, I'd appreciate your comment here if it is of interest to a legal counsel, much like we did with the CAO job description. We included the approximate population of the county. And I don't know. Oh, we have that in the community. Never mind. Sorry, I'm trying to be mindful of the sections. The data got my attention.
On that data point, Tanya, maybe that's a great question for you. If I have all those numbers accurate in terms of FTEs and budget dollars, I think I tried to pull them from the document, but wanted to validate that those are accurate.
Finding my mute. I had other screens over it. I can work, Heather, with you and verify that those are the accurate numbers. I don't have those handy right now.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Mhm.
Okay, so it's the second sentence. The office also represents the housing authority and all county service districts with the exception of clean water services. I took that sentence from the original job description, which is where that came from. And it sounds like there is some suggestions around not mentioning clean water services and just other county service districts in a more generalized term.
Well, I think ultimately what I was suggesting is changing the word all to some.
Okay.
Because, it does get confusing. We don't have TVFNR, the Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District, which uses the geography of Washington County. Then THPRD comes into question and TVWD comes into question. So I don't think we need to be encyclopedic here. I just think, it's the housing authority and some service districts.
Great. Anyone else have any thoughts on that particular section?
The only thing I wanted to add, so this is Diane Taniguchi-Dennis from Clean Water Services. So we have our own general legal counsel. They do coordinate together, but we're represented separately.
Great, thank you.
Well,
Diane.
just like we have an administrative officer and a CEO. So I think we're in a situation of not being able to see the forest through the trees because we're so close to it.
And then to your point earlier, Chair, around the first sentence in that second paragraph around a talented and dedicated group of employees, adding something in there about being a veteran staff, I'm understanding that that's where you wanted me to add that, correct?
Veteran, long-serving, whatever in your expertise you think is the best term.
Great. And that leads us to the community section, which we do have the population there. Again, I think those numbers are accurate, but Tanya, maybe as a extra note, you could double check that number too as well. And there were no other comments in that section either. Any additional thoughts from the board? Great. So last, but certainly not least, in all terms, is the compensation and benefits section. And we need to, I'm not sure if Elizabeth has information. I had asked that Eva join us today from a HR perspective to talk through any potential salary range or compensation information. I don't see her on yet. So maybe Elizabeth, oh, there she is.
Yeah, there you are. Okay.
So that's
everybody.
the one. I want to check through that. The verbiage there, there were no adjustments outside of, we do need to have some information as it relates to the salary range. So Eva, any information that you could share with the board there would be greatly appreciated.
Well, I also want to remind the board that it says include the following. So this is not necessarily an exclusive list. So as we go through the negotiation process.
Right. And this position, because it's a contracted position, does not have a current salary range. So like other positions that do, this is unique. It's like when we hired the county administrator.
So what we had the benefit of with the CAO search was a market assessment, a market analysis, and that's what we need here.
Yes, agreed. So the question is whether the county is going to do that or if the Novak company is going to take that on. So Heather, just let me know and we can do that, or we can have you do that.
Okay. So then would we, if we choose to move forward with this document and approve the language, would we want to include a market range, or just the contract is at the discretion of the Board of Commissioners, and then remove the with the salary range component?
So we just went through this with a CAO position, so I don't know why we're revisiting that practice. That was a contracted position as well. All three of our direct report positions are.
Yeah, we typically don't list a range on those announcements.
We did.
Did we?
Yes.
Okay, I wasn't part of that, Chair, I'm sorry.
And we find that it's good practice to put a range in and be transparent in the salary range, which is why I had it worded that way, specifically noting that it was at the discretion of the board, but typically including a range or some kind of variable there is advantageous and transparent to the market and candidates that are interested in the opportunity.
Right.
Tanya, I see you unmuted yourself as well. Do you have anything to add there?
No, the chair was going to say something.
So I'm sorry I didn't catch earlier that this was a significant question still open as opposed to work that was in progress. So we on the board need HR search professionals to do this work and then bring it back.
Okay. Eva, you and I can work together on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I have some data from a while back I can share as a starting point.
I believe I've already shared that with,
Okay. All right.
with Heather and Tanya.
Any other changes outside of knowing that we need to ensure that information and bring that back to the board? Are there any other thoughts and or changes to that section? Great. And then the other component is just logistical information around how to apply. So I assume you don't have any changes to that section.
So I just want to highlight here then for the board that the job description will be finalized. I think we need to see electronically the final before it goes live. And if there are any questions with regard to the salary range, you'll come back to us with that. So then Novak has, per the timeline, will be posting that information in February around the 21st or so. Heather, I just want to reinforce that we appreciate getting notification when that information is publicly available. Then, oh, excuse me, I noticed the wrong date. That'll be launching here in early January, and the application process will be open. Then Novak will go through all of that, prepare information for us, and then in later February, the 26th, as we discussed earlier, we will get an electronic packet of information from Novak. Then the very first week of March, we enter into our very intense time. And I know it's doubly intense for me because I'm participating in the WCVA, the Visitors Association CEO search process as well. So we'll be going through, we'll have that information to go through and semifinal interviews the middle of March. And then after that, continuing our intensity the week after, or is this the week of, no, it's the week after spring break week.
Correct.
For public schools, the last bit of a week in March, March 29th. So that will round out our first really fast months of the year. Yes, Alan.
There's just one other issue that has been a problem in my recruiting is the 6% contribution to PERS from county employees. It's become a surprise to some of my employees, and when I've been recruited, and I've always tried to make that sure they're aware of that up front, so it doesn't come as an ugly shock. And I know Tanya went through this, and I believe she was aware of that, and I know I talked to her about that. So I don't know if you want to put that in there or just when you talk to the candidates, make them aware of that. So
Heather, I know that you have multiple position searches with multiple agencies here in Oregon. So I assume as part of the application, the first application submittal and whatnot, that we would be able to count on you to help ensure that folks that we then take through the semifinalist process are aware of the Oregon public employee retirement system changes that came into being as a result of 2019.
Yeah, absolutely. And more than likely, given the heavy emphasis on Oregon and Oregon State Bar membership, people will undoubtedly already be familiar with that. But of course, we'll validate and confirm.
I got a question. Alan, are you saying that you think that we ought to change our policy? I didn't understand what you were saying. Yeah, it's a problem, I understand, but this is a bigger issue for the entire organization. And
No, Commissioner Rogers, I was just merely wanting to make sure that the applicants were aware of that. So when they're doing the mental calculations in their head, how much does it cost to move and live, and they want to make sure you get that 6% take now.
Okay. So you're not suggesting any change? I mean, that would be something we'd have to do.
No, that would be a huge change. Would be much way beyond the scope of this discussion. So.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. All right.
This is where I'm really glad we have recruiting professionals helping and assisting us with all the intricacies and nuances of how applicants are looking at positions throughout not only Oregon, but our nation.
Any other thoughts on the profile? We're good on the timeline. I think these are minor adjustments to be able to make them quickly and then put it all together in the branded version with the images and photos and county logo and all those components for your review quickly. And even I will work on the salary piece.
I neglected to write a question down for myself, so it just popped back into my head. So here we are now in January, and it seems pretty clear that some folks are comfortable traveling for business, others not. And it's highly unlikely that applicants will have the opportunity of vaccinations, at least for, I'm assuming, have I'm not skeptical of the calendar. It's just there's a big population here in the USA to get vaccinated. So we're talking about semifinal interviews the middle of March. My question to you, Heather, is do you think those will be done by video, or do you think it's likely to be in person? What do you think?
I think it depends on where we continue to be from a county perspective and the categories that the governor has outlined, with us continuing to be in that extreme risk category, not necessarily having that crystal ball to understand where and how we would transition out of that. If we do continue to be in an extreme or high risk category, I do believe it would be relevant and appropriate to do at least those first rounds of interviews virtually using and leveraging this technology.
Okay, so it sounds like we really need to touch bases no later than late in February to see where things stand. And hey, you know, maybe we'll have good news. Maybe community spread will drop off like a cliff and we'll be in moderate risk.
I'll keep my fingers crossed, and I will do all of the wonderful dances that are required to get us there. And we can certainly discuss that in our candidate presentation conversation in that March 2nd timeframe because I think we'll have a better realistic picture of where we may be at that point in time, and hopefully we will have advanced in the most positive way possible to do things in person. But I think we need to pay attention to continued health guidelines and where we are as a county.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah.
It really helped me.
Any other questions? I know we're just 2 minutes over. I want to be cognizant you have a full schedule today. So is there anything else from the board? Any additional questions or thoughts as it relates to this position?
Commissioner Rogers?
Yeah, I have just a general one. We all plan for the best, obviously, that things will happen in the time frame that they're going to happen. We were gifted, I think, by having Alan say that he would stay on for a while and kind of cover. But do you have any thoughts on what recruitments are doing? Do you think, from your experience, that this position will draw sufficient applicants that we will not have to permanently take Alan back and all that sort of thing and bludgeon him somehow?
I think we will successfully be able to allow Alan to venture into retired life. And I do think it will be, there will be good, genuine interest in the position and the opportunity. And I think our recruitment timeline allows for that. It allows for us to engage in all the appropriate conversations and gives us a good window in which to do that and still stay on target and on task with our timeline so that Alan can do all of those wonderful retired things that he gets to do in his next phase.
It was also a factor for discussion with the interim contract discussions that we went through with Alan. He's been gracious in providing us a window of opportunity of 6 months. We all hope that it won't be that long because we want to ensure that he is able to do everything he wants to do post-retirement from Washington County. So, but we won't have to do any further contract work to cover our bases through the end of June.
Thank you all for taking the time, and thank you for reading through the profile and your suggestions. Looking forward to this next phase as we move forward.
Terrific. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Elizabeth. Onward, ho we go.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. So moving on, Homeless Plan Advisory Committee appointments.
Madam Chair, we should have Comey and Annette for you. Comey, can you hear us?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Well, should we start?
Please.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Chair Harrington. Good afternoon, commissioners, especially the two new ones that were sworn in today. Nafisa Fai, welcome. Commissioner Rogers, welcome. So we are here before you this afternoon for the Homeless Plan Advisory Committee appointments. And the matrix, we have shared that. And the recommendations we have as Stacy Triplett. She's with Work Systems. She will be the business representative. Apologize, I should give a little background on the Homeless Plan Advisory Committee. So the Homeless Plan Advisory Committee was created in 2008, so about 13 years this year. And the role of the HPAC, or the Homeless Plan Advisory Committee, is to provide oversight for the county's implementation of the county's homeless programs. There's 17 members, and we are here to recommend about 5. There's a vacancy for commissioner, which was occupied by Commissioner Scouten, whose term ended December 31st, 2020. So we're waiting for your board to recommend one of your members to be the commissioner rep. So to our recommendation, Stacy Triplett is with Work Systems. For the business, Kara Kazemba, citizen at large. She was formerly the homeless representative, and now she's transitioning to citizen at large. And our next one is Michelle Marcus. She's a homeless services consumer. She volunteers and works at a shelter in Forest Grove, I believe. There's also Cassie Wadila. She was appointed last year and for the remainder of somebody else's term. So now we are recommending her for a full term. The same with Talia Bushbaum. The one person who applied for reappointment, but we are not recommending appointment, is called Sarah Huggins Smith. She was a homeless consumer rep, and we were not able to connect with her for the interview, but Michelle Marcus is equally capable to represent that group. So that is our recommendations, commissioners. Anything you wish to add, Annette? She's on mute.
No,
right.
no, I think you did a great job, Comey. So
All right.
thank you. I guess I would just say that there was a interview panel of 3 individuals, Office of Community Development, because they have the ESG entitlement funds, Housing Services because of our continuum of care and lead role with HUD, and then also the Office of
Community Development.
Community Engagement. And community engagement. Amanda Garcia Snell was on the committee as well. Thank you.
So I'm a little confused by the matrix then. So usually we have, so what the recommendation is for the 3 listed under new applicants to be appointed, and the first 2 under the reappointment section, not all 3.
That's correct.
Okay. Just making sure that's clear.
And then keep in mind, there's a commissioner position that also expired December 31st that will be waiting for your board's action.
Yep. We'll get that sorted out in due course. Any other questions from commissioners? Are folks comfortable with having this slate brought to us for adoption in a future meeting? Seeing no questions, it looks like we're okay for now.
Thank you, commissioners.
Great, good to
Thank
see
you,
you,
and Happy
Comey
New
and
Year.
Annette. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, we'll move on to the Planning Commission appointment discussion. And I'll wait until the appropriate staff come up. And if you could, in the staff overview of this, could you please make sure we're all clear? It's my understanding that the Planning Commission is the only board and commission where recommendations are clearly looked for from specific district commissioners, but that the parties that a district commissioner or each of the 5 of us in our requisite appointments, it's represented in the position column, but the person does not need to reside in the district. And some of the verbiage made that a little confusing.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I'll look to Todd Borkowitz. Todd may be a little bit more familiar with the ins and outs of the bylaws of the commission, planning commission.
Yeah, so basically our bylaws indicate that we have to have geographic diversity within the planning commission, but it doesn't specifically state that a commission. Okay, I'll leave it at that.
And I think it's been practiced that the commissioners typically get deference in terms of appointments for folks, 2 appointments each, and the chair an at-large position. And typically, in most cases, the folks that they recommend reside or work within their district. But more of a practice than a requirement.
That's the part where the practice versus requirement isn't necessarily true. I know this because I've never lived in District 1, and my husband was a long-serving member of the Planning Commission. He was appointed by the District 2 Commissioner for a long time. So I know that my understanding follows the bylaws, but I really have a problem with articulating a practice that isn't in accordance with the bylaws.
Okay.
That's what I'm harping on here.
Right. And I apologize, I don't have a copy of the bylaws in front of me too, so.
One thing that would be helpful to me is what the chair has indicated has happened. That there have been people outside the districts, but I like the idea that we have geographic representation, that people get people from their district, but we're not going to know what our districts are going to be for a while. And then you say, well, of course we do. Well, no, we're doing some boundary changes. So what's the immediacy of all this? We're down now, I know, but is this something that needs to be done in 60 days, 90 days? I'm asking you, Stephen, do you know?
Yeah, so we have a vacancy that we would.
My district, yeah.
No, actually in District 1, we actually have a vacancy, and then we have a commissioner up, a potential reappointment in District 2 currently. And so the timing is a little bit flexible. We don't have to appoint someone right away, but I believe the Planning Commission's next meeting is scheduled in early February. So we were thinking we'd try to get an appointment done in January and have that person available for that meeting in February.
Actually, if I could mention, the next meeting is January 20th. And I believe the bylaws do state that current Planning Commission members may continue to serve until new members are appointed. And so
that doesn't mean they're available and
right. Right. And so Commissioner Beatty is the one that's indicated that he did want to step down, and he did indicate when last we spoke that he was willing to stay on for a reasonable amount of time until someone else could be appointed.
Oh,
and
that's new information to me. When he and I spoke a few weeks ago, that wasn't the case. So good. Thank you.
That was our last understanding. So you may have spoken with him since we have. We might want to check in with him. And then Commissioner Lockwood was interested in continuing on, and so she would continue to be available. So we may not have a vacancy. If there was a delay, it may not be a problem because of those two things.
I guess I I'm sorry. I just want to add my perspective that the board should be comfortable with the appointment. That's the most important thing from my perspective. And in my history, there was a time we were down to 6 commissioners at one time, and we got through, we muddled through. It certainly wasn't optimum. So can we live with 8 for a while? Yes. Can we live with 7 for a while? But the most important thing is for you to be comfortable.
And if I may just chime in on that, because my experience with these appointments where they are, say it was Commissioner Rogers' appointment, but he liked the person that was in a different district. And basically the board would defer to Commissioner Rogers, are you okay with having this person appointed for your slot? And so that's sort of been the past practice, if my recollection is.
So I would like to contribute a couple of other comments. Mahesh Udata has served on the Washington County Transit Advisory Committee. He's been an active participant. So we do have experience with him serving on a LUT committee. So I think he's a good applicant. Ashley Hartmeyer Prigg has not reapplied for this. I think our systems need to be updated. She withdrew. Her withdrawal is permanent, and we need to update our systems to reflect that.
Yeah, and my apologies, Chair. We had what got included in the packet was an older version of the matrix. So we updated it earlier this morning, and she has been removed.
Oh,
thank you.
I was not made aware that we had a new packet as of this morning.
Okay, yeah, apologies. So we just realized it this morning. So, okay, well, and I apologize. We started off, jumped right in here. So I just wanted to say thanks for giving us an opportunity here to talk about Planning Commission appointments. And to welcome Commissioner Fye, obviously, to the commission. And we have, as I mentioned, 2 appointments that we wanted to discuss today, one being in District 1, Commissioner Fye's district, one being in District 2, Commissioner Teresa's district. And I'm going to let Todd just talk through this a little bit with us too, but I just wanted to say that we do have an incumbent commissioner in District 2 who has requested to continue serving. And then we have 3 potential candidates in District 1 that we can run through and discuss. And then we can have a discussion afterward. And as Andy and we've alluded to, there's no urgency that we have to act on this immediately, but we're happy to answer questions and we're happy to come back if need be to have a second discussion. So with that, I'll turn it over to Todd. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. So good morning, Chair Harrington, and welcome Commissioner Fye, and hello other commissioners. I'm Todd Borkowitz, Associate Planner in the Community Planning Group, and we're here today to present candidates for consideration for the 2 Planning Commission positions. The first terms of Ian Beatty of District 1 and Deborah Lockwood of District 2 are ending. Well, both are eligible for reappointment. As was indicated, only Ms. Lockwood is seeking reappointment. The new 4-year terms are available to start on February 1st. And so per board procedures, the County Administrative Office solicited applications from individuals over a 6-week period. And we have 3 applications for Mr. Beatty's District 1 position and 3 applications for the District 2 position, including seated Commissioner Ms. Lockwood. So we had reviewed applicant materials and conducted phone interviews with each of these applicants to gain additional information on their skills and knowledge, and each applicant we have confirmed is a resident of the district that they are applying for. So I'll briefly note information on each applicant, and there is more information on them included with your agenda materials. So for District 1, applicants are Raymond Eck Jr., Anastasia Milliman, and Michael No. Mr. Eck is retired and lives in the Hazeldale area of the Aloha community. He serves in several county advisory boards, including the Budget Committee for the Enhanced Sheriff Patrol District and Urban Road Maintenance District, as well as the Urban Road Maintenance District Advisory Committee. and Metro's Technical Advisory Committee. Next, for District 1, we have Ms. Milliman, who is a business analyst for a utility provider and lives in the Sexton Mountain area near Cooper Mountain. And then third, we have Mr. No, who is a licensed real estate agent, a role where he regularly uses the Washington County's Community Development Code. And he lives in the El Monica area. So those are for District 1. Again, Ian Beatty's position. District 2 applicants include the sitting planning commissioner, Deborah Lockwood, as well as Mahesh Udata and Frank Shen. Alan Ross is listed on the materials that you have, but he formally withdrew from consideration this morning due to his family's relocation out of Washington County. So he asked not to be considered anymore. So we're looking at 3 candidates for the District 2 position. The first one being Commissioner Lockwood, who has served on the Planning Commission since 2017. She's currently retired and previously served as a volunteer coordinator for Peninsula Children's Center and was professor of English for nearly 20 years and has just really extensive volunteer experience. And she currently lives in the Helvetia area. The second candidate for District 2 is Mr. Udata, who is a senior manager in technology services. I should note that Mr. Udata is the only one of the candidates who is a graduate of the Civic Leaders Project of Washington County and Adelante Mujeres. And he currently serves, as you had indicated, Chair, on the Washington County Transit Committee, as well as the THPRD Budget Committee, and is a member of CPO7 and CCI. And he lives in the Five Oaks area. Lastly, for District 2 is Mr. Shen, who is a project manager with a firm that serves the non-government semiconductor industry, and he lives in the Somerset West area of Washington County. And I should add that there were, as indicated, there were 2 district candidates who withdrew from consideration in support of reappointment of Deborah Lockwood. And one of them, Chair, you had mentioned Ashley Hartmeyer-Prigg. Our understanding was that she did not want to be considered for this position, but she may want to be considered in the future. We'll go ahead and confirm that with her after this meeting. The second individual was Mary Mansa, who asked not to be considered at this time for this current position, assuming that Commissioner Deborah Lockwood is reappointed. So because of the technical nature of the Planning Commission's work and due to her service for the past 4 years, the staff recommends reappointment of Sitting Commissioner Deborah Lockwood for the District 2 position. And so our ask today of the board is that you review and consider the Planning Commission District 1 and 2 candidates, provide direction to staff on these appointments, and if you're ready to move forward with the appointments, authorize an action for the January 19th board meeting to select and appoint candidates to serve these 4-year terms, representing each respective district. We should also note, just in regards to Commissioner Fai's new time on the board, that if the board is not yet comfortable moving forward with the District 2 position, we can delay that appointment until further consideration. So with that, we're happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
And I think Todd meant to say the District 1 position at the end there.
Could I ask you to say again who your recommendation is for District 1? I missed that.
At this point, we weren't making a recommendation. We just wanted to provide the information and then find out if the board has any suggestions or recommendation on that.
And I might just note that we did interview the candidates that live within the District 1 and 2 areas. If the board was interested in considering other candidates, we can interview them as well. But at this point, we hadn't. So we're just looking for further direction from the board, how you'd want us to proceed, because we can do further work.
I think for District 1, today is literally my first day. So I like to, if the candidates that are applied and interviewed, if they don't mind waiting, I like to weigh in on this and get back to you. And then the other thing I noticed, Stephen, you sent to me the applications of the 3 candidates that applied. I noticed that their race, gender, ethnicity was redacted. Is there a reason?
Yeah, we redact most personal information for what gets posted online. And so what we sent, or what I sent you, was a copy of the same thing that we posted online to the public. So I'll work with Todd and we'll get you a copy without the redactions.
Commissioner Fye, if I could just clarify that the redactions are for personal information such as address, phone number, and email. As far as I know, we do not collect the information on. Is Teresa? We do not collect other information.
Actually, the new application forms do have that other information on them. I did notice that recently. So that information, I believe, is available now.
Okay, well, we can look into providing that for the next.
But Commissioner Fye is highlighting that this information there is information that is redacted out for commissioners. So if a commissioner wants to reach back to any of the applicants, each of the 5 of us has the opportunity to weigh in and make recommendations on the geographic positions for this one board and commission, but we are provided with applicant information that is redacted. And so it takes us extra steps. If we're reviewing packets outside of normal working hours, then it's too little too late, since we have to work through staff to get access to that information. So it just makes it a little more complicated. So Commissioner Fye, if I was in your shoes, there is no rush, and you can consider all of the applicants, not just those who reside within District 1. And I do find it interesting. Nancy Thomas is another graduate of the Civic Leaders Program, and she has commented to us, to the board members, as we've seen through various constituent reports in 2019 and 2020, that she has applied for multiple boards and commissions. She has yet to be appointed to any. She was a participant in our August listening session, and I know she has some great professional experience. So through our community engagement team, one of the things I need to follow up on, but once again, there isn't time for a hallway conversation when we're working virtual, that we need to connect. I need to connect up with the community engagement folks and find out, what do I need to do in order to ensure that this professional, willing, very capable, skilled at communicating individual is able to serve on a committee. Commissioner Treese?
Thank you, Chair Harrington. In response to your comment, Stephen Roberts and I have talked about these different appointments, and I also asked if Nancy could be interviewed, and I believe that Stephen indicated that she was going to be interviewed, but the positions were 1 and 2. I recognize that isn't necessarily the practice. Yeah. So I'm just pointing out that
You muted, Commissioner Treese.
Sorry. The password for 2021 is "you're muted." So, I will say that I talked to Stephen at length about this. I'm supporting the staff recommendation for District 2. the reason I'm supporting it is that I'm really comfortable with the fact that there's a 2-term limit for the Planning Commission. One of the things that we've talked about over the course of the 2 years that I've been here is the length of time that some of our commissions and advisory groups go on. So Deborah has been an active participant on the Planning Commission. She's been engaged, and she has the support of other members of her Planning Commission as well. So I am supporting the staff recommendation on that appointment.
Great. And maybe if I could ask Commissioner Fye, would you like for us to go ahead and provide you information on all of the applicants, regardless of district, and we'll unredact for you as well?
Yeah, and I think, the other point I was trying to get at is, Washington County, we have an equity and inclusion office now. And I think if we were to meaningfully diversify our committees and have a really strong representation from our communities, I think it's important to point out the demographics of the groups on that committee and the Planning Commission. So that's where I was getting at to the second point. So if you could, I like to see that information, and also I think maybe at one point down the road the board can have, the demographics of that whole commission.
Okay.
Chair Harrington and Commissioner Fye, if I can respond to that. Latricia Tillman is currently working on that effort, understanding greater our current demographics of existing board and commission members, to pair that with an application process such as you're discussing today. She will plan on updating the board on this at her quarterly update, which is planned for this month.
All right.
Okay.
I think we're set for this topic, right?
Great. Thank you all.
Great. Good to see everyone.
Thank you.
Might I be able to ask the question? We do have a board item scheduled for 2 weeks. And I wonder if the board does want to move forward with the reappointment of Commissioner Lockwood, and we can hold on the other appointment and do more work. But if you want to move ahead with the one, we can do that.
I thought that was the recommendation earlier. Yeah.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All righty. Moving along. Now we're going to get into some real nitty-gritty stuff here. Our next agenda topic is proposed revisions to the Washington County Code chapters 8.04 and 8.8. A bunch of garbage pertaining to the Solid Waste Advisory Commission. Welcome back, Thomas Eggleston and Marnie Kyle.
Hi, sorry about that. I was muted and you couldn't see me. So thank you, Chair Harrington, Marnie Kyle, Director of Health and Human Services. And I just wanted to remind everybody, so we're bringing this back from a discussion that we started on November 17th. And it's really, even though it looks like, well, it is a code change, what we're really trying to do is look at our Solid Waste Advisory Committee that's appointed by the board. And the reason we began to look at this was really trying to take to heart and put into action the board's recommendations to look at our committees and our advisory boards for both diversity, looking at term limits, looking at who's representing our communities on these boards and commissions. And so that's what started this conversation. Tom's gonna remind you of the very robust process that he used to get community input and input from the Solid Waste Advisory Council. And then the input that we received from your board as we did one-on-ones. So with that, I will turn it over to the capable hands of Tom Eggleston to kind of walk you through what we've learned since we last met on the 17th. And Commissioner Fye in particular, we're here really to answer questions. And I know this is, you haven't had the opportunity like the other board members to have a couple of presentations and a one-on-one session. So please, please, please feel free to ask any questions because we want you to feel really comfortable with any decision that you all make today. I'll turn it right over to Tom.
Thank you, Marnie. Good afternoon, Chair Harrington, commissioners. My name is Tom Eggleston. I'm the division manager for the Solid Waste and Recycling Division in the Health and Human Services Department. And I also wanted to say it's nice to meet you, Commissioner Fye. Welcome to the board and congratulations on your swearing-in ceremony this morning. I watched it with Secretary of State Rosenblum, and that was a great ceremony. And to you too, Commissioner Rogers, congratulations on your reappointment. So we're here today, as Marnie mentioned, to follow up on our discussion from November 17th in regards to the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. And we're talking about some mumbo jumbo in terms of chapters 8.04 and 8.08 and our administrative talk, but we're going to try to plain talk it as much as we can when we get into the presentation. So can you give me a next slide, please? So our policy question here today is another bit of a mouthful, but really what we're asking is, do the proposed amendments to Washington County Code, chapters 8.04 and 8.08, which regard garbage and recycling, collection and disposal, and the draft committee bylaws align with your board's direction from the November 17th work session? And that direction we received was we interpreted as to clarify the committee's purpose and duties. And as Marnie mentioned, we followed up with some one-on-one conversations, so we got some more information, and we're trying to present what we think we heard back and see if we're on the right track. So next slide, please. So as a little bit of background, I wanted to give a little bit of an overview of actions to date. So a little bit how we got here. As your board may recall, in May of 2020, we came to the first work session to kick off this project. We outlined the project and our objectives to diversify the committee and incorporate equity and inclusion into the structure of the committee based on the equity resolution that your board had adopted in February. In May, we also then came back with a consent agenda item to authorize County Council to make some amendments to Washington County Code. This committee is actually established in County Code, so if we want to change the structure and makeup of the committee, we do that through code changes. So this is a procedural step. And throughout the summer, we held listening sessions with community groups. We met with the Civic Leaders Group. We met with the Master Recyclers. We met with the Environmental Promoters Program that we've worked with Central Cultural on. We did some research with partner agencies such as Metro, looking at their advisory committees and how they incorporated equity and inclusion. And we worked with our Public Health Division that has done some work in incorporating equity and diversity into its bylaws. November, we came to your board for a work session and discussed the proposal. We had a very good discussion. Much of the conversation revolved around whether or not the committee is a community advisory committee, I put air quotes around it, or a technical advisory committee. And I think those are two very good questions in regards to what type of advice this committee provides to your board and to staff as we work through solid waste and garbage related issues. And throughout December, we also met one-on-one with most of you and had conversations about the committee, about the discussion on the 17th, and tried to really hone in on what type of proposal you would meet your vision for this committee the best we can. So next slide, please. So I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of what we received we heard as input from the board from the work session on the 17th of November and also in our conversations. One of the things we heard really loud and clear, I think this came through on our work session on the 17th, and it was a very great observation, is that we needed to really ensure that the purpose and the duties of the committee aligned with the proposed amendments. We proposed a vision of a committee that really kind of centered it as a community advisory group. I think Commissioner Rogers and Chair Harrington, you really pointed out that those duties don't really speak to that, and they're very technical and sounding and use lots of code references. So that was one of the takeaways, was to make sure that the actual duties and the purpose align with the vision. We also heard loud and clear that we really do want to keep a focus on equity and a focus on diverse membership. of community members. That was really important to the board as exemplified in the diversity, equity, inclusion resolution. We wanted to consider whether this committee acts as a technical or an advisory body, a community advisory body, excuse me. So we really wanted to have that robust discussion about, are we receiving technical advice and technical information from this committee, or are we really receiving community input and voice and consumer feedback essentially from the committee? We also heard we wanted to ensure that the committee is accessible to community members interested in serving, and that could come in many shapes or forms: when the committee meets, how it meets, where it meets, how staff support committee members in providing education and information, and that's all very important, and we heard that was important to your board as well. And then we also heard that we wanted to come back and demonstrate how the draft bylaws that are included in this packet would kind of implement the proposed code language that's coming before you now. So next slide, please. So the proposal summary. So this is the same proposal because we didn't hear explicit direction to bring back a different proposal that we presented in November, but I wanted to reiterate the proposal and then talk about the additions to it next. So the proposal summary is that we would result in a name change from Solid Waste Advisory Committee to Garbage and Recycling Advisory Committee. And this is really along the thread of using plain language as we use in the community and not our jargon that we use in bureaucracies. We have an open and equitable recruitment and membership clause that kind of commits the county to providing or developing a system that is more open and equitable for community members to be recruited. The proposal is to increase the number of public member positions from 6 to 9, reduce the number of industry member positions from 3 to 1 and make it a non-voting position, retain the current non-voting HHS member position, change the membership term from 5 years to 4 years, and add term limits to allow no more than 2 successive terms of membership. Next slide, please. So these are the new adjustments based on our conversations that are in the packet before you today. The first is that we do want to highlight up front that we have aligned the purpose and vision with the community advisory body concept and approach, less of the technical advisory body approach. We wrote the purpose and duties to imply that the committee will be providing advice from community members and businesses as consumers of the garbage and recycling collection system into our management and oversight of the garbage and recycling collection system. So really we're looking at receiving input on how the system meets the needs of the community it serves, how it meets the needs of small businesses and say multifamily community members, folks that live in apartment communities and all those kinds of interests. We really wanted to focus it on the consumer, the user experience, and identify user groups that are experiencing the system differently and receiving advice and feedback from them. The committee would review rules that affect services provided. And I think it's important to note, as this came up last time, that rates are included in that kind of theme of rules. So if we're providing new set of rules on multifamily recycling requirements, or the rates that are charged to single family or multifamily communities as well. And also input on education and outreach programs for our recycling outreach. And then we also ensure that there's another bit of direction in the purpose that ensures the diverse community member representation that gives us more direction to move into the bylaws. Next slide, please. So the bylaws are also attached. It's a very large document, about 6 pages, and it's bylaws, so they're kind of hard to read, but I think the highlights of the bylaws that we wanted to bring forward and share with you was the section that defines public membership categories. This is our attempt to craft the bylaws as to guide staff and the committees into becoming more of a committee focused on equity. So we are highlighting the importance of representation from historically marginalized groups with lived experience of racial and ethnic inequities as a membership category that would be important to have served on this advisory body. And we also are including different garbage and recycling system customer groups, is I guess what we would call them. And that's where we kind of try to call out seniors, students, folks that live in apartment complexes, small businesses. They all experience the solid waste collection system very differently. And we want to hear what they think about the rules and the policies that we're making that affect the services they take. The bylaws also lay out rules for how the committee selects its officers, which has never really been defined before. And we've ended up with a committee that's kind of retained its power structures as it has historically. So we wanted to be intentional about re-electing the chair and a vice chair of the committee and kind of selecting its officers. Ground rules for how the committee meetings are conducted. We're trying to incorporate some trauma-informed practices that we use in HHS into managing the committee. Making sure that it's more open and a little bit less rigid. One of the things we heard back is it's very challenging and difficult to engage in the process if you don't understand Robert's Rules of Orders and all these types of things. So we're trying to deformalize the conversation and process a little bit in the committee setting. Educational opportunities and commitments. This is something we heard from community members is it's really hard to have these conversations because it's a very technical, very complicated subject. And I think it is complicated, but it's incumbent upon the county to provide education to committee members and applicants so that they can feel comfortable providing input as a customer, as a person that takes service from the system. We also are including pre-committee meetings as requested. This is a practice we learned from Metro actually, where community members can request a conversation with staff to say, before the meeting, we want to have a conversation to understand the issue more and talk through it one-on-one with somebody. So that's a commitment I think staff is willing to make here in terms of helping community members understand topics and issues so that we can really work through the meat of them in a committee meeting. And then accessibility considerations for members. As we moved virtually over the last month or so, couple months, I was optimistic, but we've seen a lot more engagement and the meetings are more attendance. So I think there's something to be said about continuing to have a virtual option, if not rotating through virtual and meetings in person. So we're looking at more accessibility considerations. So next slide, please. I'm almost done, I promise. Membership options. So we did want to bring some options to you. Through the conversations we are seeing and having, the membership configuration seems to be the biggest area where we're having some challenge making a recommendation that can stick, and we want to make sure that we're on the same page with you. And so we wanted to bring forward a couple options. The current proposal as a review here is that we could reconfigure the committee to 9 voting community members, 1 non-voting industry member, and 1 non-voting HHS member. Another option, or option 2 on the screen here, could be we could adjust the voting status of the industry member position, recognizing that if we retain a vote in the industry member positions, that position would then remove 1 vote from the community member side because we need an odd number of votes. We could also, I guess, add more community members if we wanted to do that, but there's infinite number of options. These are just 3 we're laying out. Another option is status quo, which is always an option. And the current structure of the committee is 6 voting public members and 3 voting industry members and 1 non-voting HHS member. Next slide, please. And this is just the next step slide. So we're really here today to receive more guidance from you and identify whether your board is prepared to move forward with ordinances. If we are, we would schedule first readings, second readings, and public hearings to move through the ordinance process. We would also like to identify whether your board wants to spend more time with the bylaws and maybe have another conversation about them, or if you're comfortable with those, we could move forward with that bylaw adoption process. And then the last step would be begin implementing these changes. So we're happy to answer any questions and talk through this more as you would like. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. And I really want to say that I'm always amazed. As an elected official, I've worked in the garbage domain for, well, this is now start of my 15th year. And I still am interested in garbage of all things. You've done a really great job of bringing information to us, making sure we know what it is we're doing, how we're going about it, and the value to the community. And that it's important to our community, how we do those things, what we do those things, and the value of the county service. So thank you. You know, as much as I was teasing in announcing the topic, garbage is really cool. So thank you. Thanks for making it fun.
We think so too in the solid waste and recycling division. So
well, good job. So commissioners, what questions and thoughts do you have? Commissioner Rogers.
I'm still a little perplexed on where we get the technical review without the members of the solid waste community, meaning the haulers. And you're going to tell me that that's all done internally, but I kind of always relied over my tenure on having somebody who was citizens who were looking at that and determining whether they thought that was a fair approach or a reasonable approach to rate increases. So maybe I'm missing it, but tell me how that's going to work. For my satisfaction, who am I going to look to as a impartial, non-staff, non-hired? I know you have a CPA that goes out and does a little bit of compilation work, but who else? Who from the community?
Yeah, so Commissioner Rogers, if I could, first I want to clarify what you consider technical. So it sounds to me that what you consider technical is specifically on rate review. Am I correct?
Yes.
And I believe that question was asked and answered last meeting as well, that our rate review process has changed and is outside of the purview of this advisory committee. So I'll leave it to Tom and Marnie to remind us about the particulars of how that is handled. It's pretty formulaic, but go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, so the advisory committee does provide a up or down recommendation essentially on the rate review. So, and our vision is that this committee would continue to do so in regards to taking the pulse on the community, whether or not it's a reasonable recommendation. So rate review is a very technical process, as you point out, Commissioner Rogers. We have a CPA firm that works for us, Marina and Company, and the Washington County Haulers Association has a CPA that works for them. They submit detailed cost reports to our staff. We review them. We arrive at a rate of return that they earned the year prior. And practice has been we are striving towards a 10% rate of return. So staff works the recommendations. And if they come in below 10%, we would likely bring a recommendation for a rate increase to 10% to the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. And in this case, we would continue to bring that forward. And then we would bring that forward to your board with that recommendation from the committee. So the technical input, I think, is, I think I understand what you're saying in terms of how do we do rate review and what are the nuts and bolts of rate review? And I think that's a very, oh, my screen just moved, I'm sorry. I think that is a very good question, but I would also say that I don't know that the Solid Waste Advisory Committee is the body that can provide that input and feedback and advice. The current committee is not capable, I would say, of doing a real thorough technical analysis of rate review processes. There's, I think we need accountants and folks that are really understanding those processes, and staff work with our consultants to get there. Also, I would say the industry being on the committee and rate review is one of the areas I think is the most challenging for us as staff to understand that a vote for a rate increase is not some type of a conflict of interest, which could be managed separately in a different way. But that's kind of my general response. And I see Marnie, you unmuted as well.
Yeah, I was just going to add that one is, we would still work with we still meet with the haulers. We've always met with the haulers outside of the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. And so we're still getting their input about rates and why, why we should think about it different than just the pure math. They always have input about that. The Haulers Association has input about that. We have always brought to this board those opinions in addition to the SWAC opinions. So, because sometimes they've been different and we've come to different agreements. And so we would continue to do that. And I think this actually improves the impartial opinion of rates that we would be bringing from the new I don't have it in front of me, Garbage and Recycling Committee, Advisory Committee, because it's less heavily weighted by the industry that's going to benefit or not benefit from rate changes. So I don't know if that helps, but the technical how do we get there has never been something that the committee has worked on.
Right. So the rate dollars and cents is what changes. The structure of rate changes has not changed for quite some time and is quite formulaic. It's embedded in our code. We use outside expertise. So this doesn't change that.
I'll simply respond. I have to think about whether I like this or not, but what I'm picking at and continue to pick at, and probably the only other person, no offense to anybody else who understands what I'm saying, would be Jerry, is that what you use as an outside firm is a compilation service. And it's just an exercise in mechanics. You're not auditing any of that information. You're not looking at any of that information. And so the service level that you tell us, if I didn't have a background, I would say, oh, that sounds wonderful. But I know what's being provided. And it's not really good, solid information for those of us. It'd be like engineering service. I'm not an engineer, but somebody said, well, an engineer looked at it, but what did they look at and what did they do? And so that's why I was hopeful that we would have some expertise to take a look at that and continue to pick at those things. But it sounds like that's not what anybody's interested in. And that's
no, what you're talking about is work that a Public Utilities Commission does. There is no jurisdiction within our metropolitan area, and I don't think exists in our state, that does the level of public utility, looking at the books of garbage and recycling companies and examines their actual books versus using a consolidated consultant examiner of those books.
I'll let it go, but I'll just tell you, they're not consultant examiners. They're not examining. And I do know firms that specifically do this work. And so it's interesting. I'm not saying we have to spend a lot of money, but I do like to push back to say, you know, are you simply looking at a 10% rate that will, I can manipulate lots of things to make that rate. That's pretty easy to do. And I was hopeful that we would have some mechanism, if it's not this, some mechanism that would poke at it a bit more. So it's an occupational hazard, but Jerry, what they're doing is compilations with a little gymnastics on the numbers. That's what they're doing.
It's no different than what the city of Hillsborough has been doing for years. And I know this because of being a Metro councilor and doing rigorous examination of what all the jurisdictions within the metropolitan area did.
I'd like to hear what Jerry says.
Well, Roy, I think I'm kind of on record that I'm not a fan of that formula that you're referring to either. I think this last year we consolidated one of our haulers, was purchased by another hauler. So now we've got kind of a big hauler and then we've got littler haulers. And that to me even accentuates the skewing of this analysis. So I didn't think this conversation was going to get into that, but I'll just go on record that I agree. I don't like the way we go about doing this. But quite frankly, in the last couple of years, we haven't recommended any raises either. So at this point in time, it's no harm, no foul. But I do think at some point in time when we do have that opportunity, I'll voice a little bit more opposition to that. So I'll just hit the pause button on that one. My real question is, I'm looking at your membership configuration options now, and I'm looking at number 1. And then I go back to the slide that talked about proposal summary. And one more back. There you go. And you're talking about you've got a committee of 6, of which 3 are industry. So you're going to remove your 3 industries. 2 of your 3 industries. So now your committee is actually 4, and you're recommending you're going to 9. So you're actually adding 5 new people to this and removing the industry's vote on the committee. Now, currently they have 3 votes. You're going to take them to 0, and you're going to remove 2 of their industry reps. I don't know. That just doesn't sound to me like you're going to be you're going to be very favored or very liked when you communicate that back. Now, maybe you've already had that conversation and they're okay with that, whatever. But even with that, you're going to have 5 new members out of 9 on there. And I think that's a significant change. And I think the dynamics of your committee and certainly the expertise of your committee could significantly change. And so I'm not sure I like that recommendation. I like the adding of the 3, so don't get me wrong there, and I like the intent of that. But I think it's either a little too fast or it's too extreme.
So sorry if it's not presented as clearly as it could be. So the committee currently exists of 10 members technically, 1 non-voting member from HHS, which is me in this position, 3 industry member positions that are voting, and 6 public member positions. So there is currently 9 voting members, and the proposal is to keep that voting membership at 9 and either bring in more community members and less industry members, and then either remove the voting rights from the industry members or retain the voting rights from the industry members. So ultimately the committee would stay the same size as 9 total. And in terms of the transition, we've been talking about this as staff. The transition, the way we envision it is if the new committee bylaws includes term limits, we would, as terms expire, current members would become either ineligible to reapply for membership or, and if they were eligible because they hadn't met a 2-term limit, then they would be eligible to reapply. So it would be a transition. I think it would take, 5, 6, 7 years for the committee to really fully change. The membership and the voting piece would change, once the bylaws were adopted, but I think it's maybe it wasn't quite as clear there. So I hope that helps clarify some on it. The current committee is 9 and it would stay 9.
Okay, then I don't know where you're going to put 3 new people.
So
you're taking 2 of your business community off.
So we take 2
advisors off.
2 of the industry positions would become public positions, community member.
But that's
positions.
only 2, and you're adding 3.
So no, we would. So if the industry member position became non-voting, we would add 1 more public member position to retain 9 total to have an odd number of votes. But if the industry member position retained its voting rights, then there would be only 2 new public member positions to achieve 9 votes, voting members. Sorry.
So I think we started with this page because that was the original proposal. But what we're asking today is, after talking to you, which of the 3 membership options, what's your direction on one of those 3 membership options? I think it's 1 more slide.
2 more slides.
Or 2, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, 1 more. There you go. So that first slide that you were looking at, Commissioner Willie, that was the original proposal that we brought you in November. And since having those conversations, we've made the other changes to the bylaws and to the duties and purpose of the committee, but we're still asking your direction on one of these 3 membership configuration options. And all 3 of them maintain 9 votes of the committee. I don't know if that helps.
I guess the reason my lack of response and quiet there meant no, it didn't. I'm sorry. I need to process this a little bit more, and I thought this was easy initially when I read through this, but now I'm more confused, obviously. So maybe what would help me was if you were with us a few minutes ago when we were looking at the Planning Commission, or before that when we were looking at the other committee, and we saw a listing of committee members and when they came on board and the makeup of the committee. And to me, that helps me process of, okay, this one's going out, this one's coming in, or we're adding some. whatever the case is, if I could see that in this, on this committee, then I would maybe be able to understand your 9 or 8 or whatever it is. I'm not, I guess not. The only one I would say no to is number 3. I don't think we need to maintain status quo on this. I like the direction that you're going, but I'm not ready to say I like 1 or 2 better.
So here's maybe a little more clarification. So we could provide a matrix, and this really, I think, the matrix depends on what the direction is on how the committee's structured a little bit, right? So it's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing here. So really, for example, we have terms that staggered that expire every March 31st of every year. And there's only 1 or 2 positions that expire every year. This coming March 31st, we have 2 industry member positions that will term out, or and in a sense, at the status quo level, we would bring back a matrix with a recommendation to reappoint, if so applied, industry members, or if a new industry member is applied and a current member decided not to reapply, we would put those industry members forward. If this proposal went forward, those 2 positions would likely be become public member positions, and the retaining industry member position would stay an industry member position. So really the only change is that there's, instead of 3, there's 1 industry member position. And then option 1 and option 2 is whether or not that position votes on the recommendations that the committee provides to your board. So I don't know if that clarifies. It's still kind of a wonky technical thing, and it's hard to visualize, and I totally understand that.
Other commissioner questions? Commissioner Fye.
Yeah, can I ask a question? Of course, I'm behind on this conversation, but I'm wondering what's the reasoning behind reducing the 3 voting industry membership to 1? And what do the current 3 members who are serving think about that?
So the proposal, we started with pretty open to what the proposal would be to adjust the committee. And we heard in our listening sessions with community groups, we heard a lot of things that were kind of led us down this path. One thing is that we heard that the community groups that we talked to really wanted to focus the committee on the public interest. And there was, and I think the other side of that is the private interest. So industry comes to the table often with private interests, with industry interests, and the conversation to focus it on the public interest maybe results in some changes in the committee makeup. Another thing that we really heard from community members is the power differential in terms of the knowledge differential. So a community member that's serving on an advisory committee alongside industry members often don't feel empowered to disagree with industry members or disagree with the conversation if that conversation is dominated by experts in a sense, or professionals in the field. So we heard from some community members comments like, who am I to disagree with this person, or who am I to disagree with that? Another comment that we heard, and that kind of power differential comment came through, and the word intimidation was used. And I don't think anyone meant that to be that someone's actually purposely intimidating anybody, but just that it's intimidating to engage in those conversations or take a position opposed to or differently than the committee members that are experts on the group. Another side of it that we heard about was, sorry, I lost my train of thought, trying to create more opportunity for different groups of community members to serve in the committee. So basically expanding the community side of it and reducing the industry side of it. Something that we've experienced as a phenomenon on our board, on our committee, is that there's some issues that industry holds very dear and near and dear to them. And if those issues come up, oftentimes they are not, the discussions don't go well, and there's a defense basically on those discussions. And we have some community members that have expressed to us that that is not helpful in terms of having a discussion about something that's as big an issue as, say, the franchise system and how it's structured. And if that's an issue that's very important to industry, that's something that can't necessarily be discussed in the committee, or it hasn't been fruitful discussion in the past, I guess.
So the thing I would add is that we regulate when we're talking about this industry. It's an industry that you as a board regulate. And so I think what we're proposing really is a shift from the regulated advising your board to the consumer who is using the services advising your board. And that's fundamentally what this shift is who does your board see, who do you want to advise your board on these services? The industry that we regulate, do you want them to have more or less voice, is sort of at the crux of this conversation, I guess. In my simple
No
terms.
guessing, it definitely is. You know, we had an extensive conversation about this back in May at our work session, and again at our November 17th work session. I realized, Commissioner Willie, you were away during that time. But we definitely wanted to ensure that we had an advisory committee that was really evolving with how the service level is evolving to meet the more diverse aspects of our community. Hence the very clear recommendation that you've made in the slide set around bringing in different voices, older adults, folks from disabilities, folks who live in multifamily housing are really key audiences that I recall just from your presentation today, really advance our practices. This committee has not been a regulatory committee, despite our own confusion at times on that. We do that as a board through other means. This committee will continue to offer us thoughts on our rates, but it's not a regulatory committee. We are that committee ourselves.
Thank you. And I think another part of your question, Commissioner Fye, was what does industry think about it? So we have had multiple conversations with our existing Solid Waste Advisory Committee, and they haven't been able to arrive at a recommendation for providing a recommendation to your board on how the committee is structured. There is a lot of conversation in the committee about the value that industry experience and knowledge brings. And industry has expressed to us that they want to be on the committee and serve on the committee. We do value their input, and we do in our proposal want to retain their membership on the committee, either as voting or non-voting members. We also meet very regularly with the Washington County Haulers Association. We value our relationship and connection with them. We attend monthly meetings with them, and we work very closely hand in hand all the time. So part of this proposal really is to kind of balance access and opportunity into the decision-making process. And we really felt taking a close analysis of who has access and who has opportunity to provide input into our decision-making process. And the gap we see is on the community side and less on the industry side. They're very engaged in our process. For example, right now we're looking at some administrative rule amendments, and we've sent those out to the Haulers Association, and they have a month to look at them over and provide input and feedback to us, and we'll have meetings and conversations about those rules and how they may affect their services. So by no means are we trying to remove them from the process. They're integral members, and they provide an essential service in our community. And we don't drive garbage trucks and manage garbage businesses, but we do provide the service on behalf of the community. So we do need their input and feedback, and we work really hard to maintain a good relationship with them.
Well, and process-wise, I think it's also useful to mention that what we're trying to move forward with today is a recommendation, and the next steps would involve having the ordinance language and a public hearing. And I expect that we will get some additional public input. After getting that public input, we can decide individually and then collectively if we're comfortable in moving forward with the proposal or not. That is the time when we can ask staff to go back and make some changes or not. So this is not the end point of the process, but this is a return to us with the feedback from our November meeting after being informed by the listening sessions and good public review of the need for changes. Commissioner Treese.
Thank you. I have a question. Considering that the difference between the number 1 and number 2 proposals is the fact that the industry member either does or does not vote, what is your thought about the, will we be able to attract an industry member for a scenario where there's no vote? And I just like to hear what your thoughts are as staff about that, because that, to me, that's the difference between these two, is really what role does the industry member play in the committee?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do believe we would attract a staff, an industry member, regardless of the voting status of the position. I think the value, or the real work of the Solid Waste Advisory Committee happens in the discussion. And the vote is usually a procedural thing, and it's mostly unanimous in the existing committee that it is today. So I think the vote is symbolic. Of course, it's symbolic in that it extends the county recognizing that the industry gets a vote at the table on those things. I also think that Metro, for example, is one of the agencies that has restructured their advisory committee. And what they did actually, instead of just having an industry member, is they actually named the industry member as being the regional director for the Oregon Refuse and Recycling Association. So it's a person that represents the hauling industry. It's not an individual that just works in the industry. And that kind of protects, I think, the industry representation, and it doesn't allow in a sense, it kind of doesn't allow the board to appoint an environmental advocate who is an industry person because they work for an environmental nonprofit. And it really focuses that position on the solid waste industry that's being regulated here. So that's another way we could think about this. And I perceive that if we did have one industry member position, that only one person would apply, and it would probably be somebody that's representing the Washington County haulers in that position. So those are some of my considerations on that.
Well, thank you. And so in essence, it comes down to if you think that the industry won't, the fact that whether or not they have a vote isn't going to be a critical piece, then it looks to me like by having 9 community members, we expand the opportunity for the community involvement. So I'm just trying to weigh through which one between these two proposals I would support. And it seems to me that the more community members that we have on this committee, the better, since it's not a regulatory committee from the standpoint of setting rates or that type of thing. It makes sense to have more community members and for the expertise of the industry person to be there as well.
So I'll weigh in. Like Commissioner Treese, I am in favor of the current proposal. And I hope that after having 3 work sessions on this in the last 8 months, that we can hopefully move forward with a formal recommendation and get additional public input through the public hearing process.
We can do that.
Any other commissioner thoughts?
Okay, just to be clear, you're recommending number 1. And just to make sure I understand, that would mean that there would be 9 voting members, of which 8 would be community and no, all 9 would be community, and there'd be no industry voting member.
Yeah, the proposal 1 is 9 voting members, 11 members total. All 9 voting members are community members. The 2 non-voting members are 1 industry member and 1 HHS staff member.
Well, I guess I'm somewhere in between there. I really don't think you should take 3 voting members out just because they're industry members. I think you should at least give them 1 vote, but that's just me. So that would be 8 community members, 1 voting industry member, and 1 non-voting HHS member.
And that's option 2 on the options list. Yeah.
Is that okay? So then you'd have 8, and you're concerned about a split vote. You're concerned about 4 to 4.
We just need an odd number of voting positions. So we could also, you could make it larger. Even you could have 10 community, 1 industry. But you could go forever. But I think a manageable size 9, I think, is a nice size, manageable size for a group like this.
Well, you could just do option number 1 and have 9 community members and make your industry member voting.
Well, let me speak to why I'm not concerned about the industry member voting or not. It's twofold. One is that the industry members are regulated in terms of the specific services that they must provide. So this is an advisory committee that is particularly helping to ensure that the way the community is experiencing the services is a positive one. The industry does stay active, voting or not. And I've been through this model as an elected official and through multiple election cycles as well. This county does a really good job of engaging with the Washington County Haulers Association, really good. And as district commissioners, if you've not met with them recently, reach out to them. Tom is present in their meetings on a regular basis. Really great relationships going on there. Is it a change to the status quo? You bet. But does that diminish their opportunity to exercise their voice? Not at all. Nor does it change the kind of services that we will need to ensure we as the regulating body move forward with. So that was all part of my thinking in being very supportive of option number 1.
Well, just for the record, I'm not there yet, so we can move ahead and do whatever, but I'm not there yet.
So staff, we know that Commissioner Treese and myself are supportive at this time of moving forward with the current proposal. Commissioner Willie needs more time. Commissioner Fye, do you have any feel for, of these 3 configurations, what you would like to see us do at this time?
Before I answer that, can I ask a question around, will the industry be considered like a consumer of us? Are they consumer?
They're not a consumer. They're a provider.
Yeah, the industry in this context is the solid waste industry. So it's the solid waste collection and disposal provider industry. The consumer side of things, we would have, businesses, some of the, I think we called out like maybe even the chamber representation. So I think the consumer side of the solid waste collection system, that is industry, is not the solid waste industry necessarily. It's more of the this business community in general, the customers of the solid waste collection system. And we would hope to have representation there. We have a member that works for a school district on our current committee, and she provides great input into the experience the school districts have on the advisory committee. So I think that is important piece to have there.
So the industry is not considered consumers because they're a business.
They provide the
it got
service.
Confusing. What he means by industry member is solid waste industry, not general business.
Right.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out if they are utilizers or consumers of whatever policies and regulations that the commission set forth. that would make them a consumer of us. And I think any board I've participated have community and consumer mixture of voting so that you get a clear picture. But if they're not a consumer and they're just a business looking out for their best interests, then I think, yeah, the number one makes sense. But if it's also, it might be, yeah, I think you all who've been involved, I feel comfortable saying that everybody who's been involved in this conversation can really dictate where to go. I think for me, I need to look into and learn more, but I feel comfortable supporting number one.
So let's make sure we're clear about what community members mean. Community members mean someone who resides in Washington County, or someone who owns a business and operates a business in Washington County. It could be an employee of the school district, for example, as the example that Tom gave. So those are just 3 examples in addition to residents who are disabled, residents who live in multifamily housing, or landlords and own multifamily housing. All of that fits in the community member category. And the industry member category is the solid waste providers, the collectors of the garbage, the operators of community transfer stations, blah, blah, blah.
And that is a business that we regulate through those 2 codes, Washington County Code 8.04 and 8.08. So they're consumers of our regulatory authority. Essentially, they're subjects of the county's regulatory authority. We have responsibility to ensure that solid waste is collected and disposed of adequately and safely in the county. And the mechanism the county uses to make sure that exercise that is that we issue certificates to these solid waste collection companies, and they provide the services that the county needs to make sure are provided. And we regulate them through the framework of the code and administrative rules. So they don't take the service, they provide the service that we're discussing.
So it sounds like we have a minimum of a majority to move forward with putting this configuration forward to the public for more input through the ordinance and public hearing process. So on your next step slides, do the board members have any other questions on any other aspects of the bylaws? Can we move forward with the items that were on that slide 2 of 2, as well as summarized in the bylaw list?
And the bylaws certainly can't come in until the code's done. So they will be towards the end of the code adoption process. So there'll be more opportunity for conversation before we get to the point where we're actually voting on bylaws, I guess, put it that way.
Okay. Okay. So board members, can we move on with the agenda, take a break, and then come back to the next items? Or do we want to keep on this one? We've got 3 of us ready to move on.
I don't have a problem with you moving on. I'm still going to make other recommendations because we've got until it comes to the board. You know, I can still continue to have conversations. So
right, we're circling the drain here. I'm just trying to get closure for today.
I completely agree.
Thank you for speaking
Let's move
up.
on, and I'll just let the staff know that I'm going to have more conversation. I think I have a simple solution, but I'm not going to throw it out right now. So.
Okay, it's a mystery.
Well, it's really not going to be much of a mystery. It's to me, it's simple, but it's okay. Let me think about this.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
All righty. So at this point, for our long afternoon, we're going to take a 15-minute break and reconvene at, well, let's see. We're going to reconvene at 3:15.
Thank you, everybody, for your time. Very nice to meet you, Commissioner Fye. Thank you, commissioners. Have a good day.
So we're not signing, oh, sorry. We're not signing back in, we're just going off screen, right?
Yes, Commissioner Treese, we're just going off screen for 15 minutes.
Chair Harrington, you were double muted.
Thank you. Is Ms. Angie on the phone on the Zoom call yet?
She hasn't come back from the break, no.
Okay. Clerk Moss, we have two big topics left on the agenda for today. Since the packet was updated on the website without notifying the board, for these next two topics, have any of the materials changed since last night's posting?
I have not been aware of any changes, Madam Chair.
So I'll ask each of the remaining topic owners if any of the materials changed. I'm not going to do that in future weeks, but since the packet changed from under our feet between late yesterday and this morning, I will ask the remaining speakers.
Chair Harrington, Tricia Mortel, the EMS agenda item and materials have not changed.
Oh, great. For the ambulance topic. Thank you, Tricia.
Welcome.
And I know Chair Tanya sent an email on that to make sure we get a process place. If there's any changes, that they notify me so I can notify you well in advance.
Yep, reinventing an improved process that we already improved while I've been chair.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, it's 3:15. So welcome back everyone from the break. We'll move on to the next topic, which is reviewing the 18-month assessment of emergency ambulance services franchisee Metro West Ambulance. So I'll turn it over to Tricia Mortel and Adrian Donner.
Good morning, good afternoon again, Chair Harrington and Board. This is Marnie Kyle, Director of Health and Human Services. And again, I just wanted to introduce Tricia Mortel, our Public Health Division Manager, and Adrian Donner, our EMS Supervisor. At least that's both of their day jobs when they're not responding to COVID. But they're here today to provide every 18 months, we provide the board with an update on our audits of the EMS system, which you regulate with the help of staff. So with that, I will turn it over to Tricia and Adrian.
Great. Thank you so much, Marnie. Chair Harrington, commissioners, good afternoon and welcome, Commissioner Fye. So nice to see you in your new role. Echoing some of the conversations this morning for the swearing in, it's been great to get to know you in your past roles. So thank you for being here. Adrian Donner not only is our EMS program supervisor, she's our public health preparedness supervisor. So at this point, the lead for vaccine distribution, so a very heavy lift, as you all know. So next slide, please. So Chair Harrington recently at a presentation asked, so what's in it for people in the community? I thought that was a very good question and it stuck with me. And it really is one that I'm taking to heart as we work on presentations to bring to your board. That should be the beginning slide on almost all of our presentations because we're here for the service of our community. So what we believe that customers should expect of the EMS system, and particularly our ambulance emergency transport, is confidence that when they call 911, they will receive safe, timely, and appropriate care by an integrated, well-trained, and well-equipped care team. That was a hard one to say. Next slide, please. So the board, as Marnie mentioned, has a role and expectations as well of the EMS system and our emergency transport. It's outlined in the EMS code 8.32. Most of that code speaks to the regulation components of our ambulances and our non-emergency ambulance wheelchair transport. The expectation is that regulation helps to protect health and safety and well-being of individuals requiring these services, and to make sure we have an efficient, effective, and safe model. It also does bring into focus the desire to have an EMS system that takes an active role in our emergency medical prevention and a comprehensive approach. And so that's why you've been hearing a lot about the EMS Alliance and our future of the EMS systems, because of that desire and bringing some of our documents and some of our systems into alignment with that desire. So next slide, please. Comprehensive approach starts with governance, and that's why the formation of the EMS Alliance, making sure that everyone who's part of our system of first responders is together in our governance structure. It also means we have a systematic approach to metrics that matter, those outcomes that make a difference, and cardiac arrest is the one that we're most concerned about. It also means that we have a focus on collaboration from the time that that call first gets to 911 to the time that we're dispatching our fire first responders and our ambulance for the transport, that all those parties are working in unison, that there's coordination to that responder system. Next slide. The benefits to the customers, of course, are many. That high quality and consistent response across the county is because agencies train and respond together, and because they review those tough calls. When things don't go as well as we planned, what are we going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again, or we fix the problem that has come to light? And we're very, very proud of our hospital cardiac arrest survival rates. We have higher rates than the nation and higher rates than the state. So that is a focus of everyone's attempts to make sure that we're working together. Next slide, please. But of course, hearing from our customers makes sure that we're on track. And so we wanted to include 2 recent customer experiences. And this is part of our assessment. We really look at what is happening, what are the customers saying? And first was from a patient who really was in serious trouble. They had a serious injury and really needed the response of both our fire first responders to get to them as quickly as possible, and then our paramedics to make sure that they could save that life. And the patient, of course, was full of gratitude. We also have EMS partners across the system. So this was a letter of commendation to a Metro West ambulance staff person from their colleagues in Hillsborough, the Hillsborough Fire System, that were working with them that night or day. I don't know if it's night, actually. So again, we really want to hear, what is it like? What's the experiences of people? Next slide. So that brings us to really what we're looking at today, and that's the assessment and oversight regulatory authority that we do on behalf of your board and on behalf of the ordinance. It's conducted on an ongoing basis. So every month, every day, Adrian's team is really working on what's happening in the EMS system. It's grounded in those standards. There are not, unfortunately, they're not national standards that everyone agree to, but there are some standards that we all expect, and response time is one of those. So you'll see that in our metrics, and our expectations of a high quality contractor that really is attending to all of the things we think are important from a management perspective with our contractors. It then requires this periodic 18-month full contract review process, and that's what we're presenting to you today. Next slide. Please also jump in at any time if there are questions. So we're really evaluating the period from January 2019 to June 2020. So as you know, we're in the middle of COVID at this point, but we're still doing our work, because the EMS system is not only important during COVID, it's important every day. So Adrian's team is still on task with what they need to do to ensure quality and accuracy in our EMS system. So the monthly activities analyzes 8 different metrics, and many of those are response times, and you'll see that in a minute. They also meet regularly in committee meetings and one-on-one meetings to discuss those situations that arise, because we do get complaints. Everyone gets complaints. So how are we going to fix those complaints? The annual activities that they observe or are part of include trainings. So coordinating trainings from all the agencies to come together so they can train on response or new medical systems or new medical skills. They organized the online medical control contract. So what this means is that we contract with one hospital so that the paramedics can call in to one place when they need medical assistance on the road before they get to their destination. Instead of calling each hospital that they're going to, they have this one person, that one entity that can give them that immediate support so that they are safely caring for patients before they even get to the emergency room. We work on licensing of all the emergency transport vehicles in the spring, and we inspect all new vehicles and a portion of existing vehicles to make sure they're up to standards. We want to make sure everybody's ready to go. And then in this last fall, just this fall, we began that full assessment of the 18-month review. Next slide, please. You've seen this slide before. I think Sia and Chief Kincaid brought this to you, but this is just the timeline of where we are in the EMS systems work. And so today we're reviewing the 18-month assessment, and that's our standards now, but they could be changing. As the Alliance works on their standards, they may decide to recommend some different metrics, for example, and those would be what we would implement with any and all of our contractors. I will say that Chief Kincaid at the EMS Alliance meeting the other day bid farewell. And he said one of the things that was really important to him was working in Washington County. I think he's actually a resident of a different county, but he really feels we have one of the best EMS systems in the state. Next slide. So performance matters. I think there's some quip about if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. We do have 40 different standards that we measure with our contractor. That may be too many. We have quite a bit more than some other counties, and so we may decide to determine, are all of these really important? Are some just widgets? But for now, we are monitoring 40 different standards in 3 functional areas: operations, communications, and clinical. Next slide. In addition to some of these metrics, there are just general practices that we would expect of a good quality contractor. We expect it of our staff. We expect that they stay up to standards, that they're really participating in the state level, the regional level, the national level, so they know what's happening, their practice, they're keeping up on their practice. There is an important component of that connection with WACA, the 911 dispatch, and you heard at your last presentation with the EMS Alliance that is even stronger, and so that's one component that we review. And medical education, again, not only their management staying up to speed on what's changing, but training their staff. So what are we doing in the field? Is it the correct methodology at this point? Is it changing? Does it need to be improved? Where are we going with that? Next slide. So these are the first 5 of the monthly metrics, and every month these are posted. We do post all of our metrics on the website, the county website, for all to see. This is how quickly does an ambulance reach someone after they've been dispatched. It's important to go quickly. It's also important to go safely. So we set these standards to make sure that in the calls that are at the most urgent, our ambulance can get there within these time frames on average. And as you can see of our map, it's going to take longer in the less populated, bigger geographical areas. But Metro West over this 18-month period did meet the metrics for all of these. It's an 88% average per zone and a 90% average across the whole county, and they met or exceeded these. Next slide. The other 3 of the monthly metrics are related to, again, the work and staffing. So unit hour utilization basically means how many people were on board for how many calls. So making sure that they have enough staff always. If they're not staffing well, that could cause staff burnout or errors or those kinds of things. And again, they met the average of this metric. Dispatch within 60 seconds. So we'd like that ambulance rolling from wherever they are within 60 seconds of getting that call. And ambulances are a little different than fire engines, if you're not aware. They basically are stationed all over the county. So they're in parking lots and mostly parking lots. I don't know, Adrian's nodding. I can't think of another place, but they basically are hanging out all over the county, ready to go. And they stage themselves based on a lot of data. They really look at where are the calls and what time of day and what season. They actually have a very complex staffing schedule with their vehicles, and they look at it all the time and they modify it so that they can meet that other metric we were just looking at because they've staged themselves well. The third metric in the monthlies is that they take almost all of the calls because they are a single contractor for this county. They're only allowed to ask for help within less than 1% of the responses. And typically this is what we call ARMA. So our fire responders who have ambulances, which are the two larger ones, would be asked to support. There could be some support from closer to other ambulances on the borders as well, but typically it is our fire support teams. Next slide. And all three of those were met as well. Some of the non-time-based metrics and the ones we look at on the 18-month are operations. Again, what we talked about before, those really good management practices I just mentioned, communications, that WACA connection, and clinical, and they met all of the metrics in these three areas as well for the 18-month review. Next slide. In addition, there are 16 just general things that we require of them, that their staff are maintaining a neat and professional appearance and professional relationships. They are stewards of our county when they're out there assisting our residents and our visitors. So we want them to be good stewards for our county. They need to maintain mutual aid agreements if indeed there was a catastrophe and we needed to call in additional supports from other places. How would they do that? It needs to be ready. They need to be a part of our crisis, our daily crisis response, and our surge crisis response. And they need to continue medical education, are three of these, the part of the 25 we're talking about. So next slide. So Metro West met or exceeded all of the metrics aligned in their contract for this 18-month period. There were no penalties or liquidated damages assessed during the period. And they continue to work on our goal of a collaborative, coordinated system with an EMS governance so that we continue to improve and have the best EMS system in the state. It's our recommendation based on that they be extended the contract. So this is a rolling contract. Every 18 months, if they meet or exceed standards, they're provided another 18 months at the tail end of their contract. So that is our recommendation to the board. Questions at this time?
Commissioners, any questions or comments? Commissioner Rogers.
Yeah, I still am smarting from several years ago where I asked the question on cost to the consumer well before you were there, Tricia. If anybody I'm looking at was not with the county. And it was one that when Bonnie Hayes goes that far, she was a chair, and she was unhappy because I kept saying, well, we're running two vehicles. We're running a fire truck and we're running an ambulance. And if you're somebody who has insurance, you probably don't care a whole bunch. But if you're somebody on limited budget, and I have a lot of those folks in the King City area and Somerville area, you care what that bill is going to be. So in these metrics, and you can make me smart again, that's okay. I'm smarting meaning that's a crazy question, not that it is, but how do we ever assess whether if this business model is ideal for the taxpayer? That they're paying their taxes to their fire department, in our case down here, Tualatin Valley. Then they're paying this fee and then they're paying administrative. At what point do we say, is that really efficient? And is it a good use of taxpayer money on the fire side and on our constituents part on the consumer side?
Thank you for that.
And I don't see that in what you've done. Okay, so I'll
Yeah,
stop.
thank you for that question. It is a very common model in many communities. I think what's important is that there's two components here. So even if it was fire, let's say doing both components, there's still two components. So you want someone to get to the scene of this crash or the patient who's down as quickly as possible. We need to start CPR, for example, if it's a cardiac arrest, because that's the important part of our survival. Then we need the transport. So they really are two distinct different activities that have to be a part of an EMS system. Whether they're done by one or two entities, they still have to happen. The charge for transport is based on, as you mentioned, insurance. But we do have within our contractors' capabilities the ability to waive based on need or write off the books. And I helped Metro West with a complaint a few years ago for a couple of residences who had to have multiple ambulance dispatched. And we were able to successfully help those elderly senior residents because they can write off what insurance doesn't pay or put someone on what we might call charity support, like they do in the healthcare system. And so that's how we help people if they're unable to pay or they don't have the means to pay through insurance.
Well, let me just follow up and say, everything you said, I've heard before, and not that it's bad, it's just that I have. And I understand that both can transport. I understand both can provide the care. I understand that there might be cost differentials, and we got into all of this crazy analysis of that the taxpayers are subsidizing the fire department so they can make a better case, all that sort of thing. But forgetting all of that, do we ever compare in other comparable areas around even Northwest of what these services cost, so that we know that our contract terms we're getting reasonable costs? So
sure,
maybe I can ask it that way.
Yeah. So some clarity, because I saw a couple of commissioners shaking their head. Not all fire departments in our agencies in our county can transport. The only ones who have ambulances are TVFNR and excuse me, who am I forgetting? Hillsborough does not. TVFNR. Forest Grove. So the others do not have ambulances within their system. We do know, and we regularly look at this, as what are our rates compared with counties in the area, and we are much lower than Clackamas and Multnomah County. That is a standard. I think you heard in the EMS Alliance presentation that we have some standards. There's some goals in terms of what we expect, and one is financial stability of the system and an efficient system that is not overburdened to the recipient. So our rates are really low.
Commissioner Willie.
Well, that was an interesting conversation, one which I had several times as mayor with City of Hillsborough and other things. But Roy, it doesn't have any pertinence to this report that we just got on the West Metro. I just want to say that 40 different standards that we hold them accountable for, and they passed all 40, met or exceeded all 40. I think we should be very happy that we have, an emergency service that provides that high quality of service to our residents. And so I'm pretty happy with this report.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Treese.
I agree with Commissioner Willie, and being as I'm the most recent commissioner to need an ambulance ride, I'm I'm saying that they did a great job, and the Hillsborough Fire Department showed up too. And as it turned out, I needed their support for my bike, and I needed the ambulance for my transport. So it was it's something that is so important. And my situation was certainly not critical like others are, and but it brought home to me just how important this emergency service is to people who are in critical need and at the risk of dying. So their support is amazing.
Commissioner Fye, I usually go last, so I'm just checking in to see if you have any questions or comments.
I don't necessarily have a comment, but I think I have a question, which seems like the story of my life today. I'm behind on all topics that come up to the board. The firefighters, I know that they're the first responders that arrive to any scene, and they're not allowed to be the ones, right? So I'm not sure I understand why they don't have the ability to transport.
Sure, so it could be that the fire agency or Metro West receive there first. It doesn't, I don't know the metrics on that right this moment, and Adrian might let her chime in a second. So either one could arrive first, and whoever gets there first really starts that important work. Is there any treatment that needs to happen, because they're all paramedics? So fire agencies can make a decision to purchase ambulances and have a transport capability, but they're not required to as a fire agency. They have paramedics on staff, but that's not their primary role or their, for all agencies. So in our county, and that's why I went a little blank for a second, TVFNR, Forest Grove, Banks have all got some amount of capability with a transport system or transport vehicles, and other agencies have, made the decision that that's not appropriate for their city or their jurisdiction. So that's why. And in our system, we do have a single franchise agreement. So Metro West is responsible and to do almost all the transport. So there is a little bit of, oversight where they are required to do it with this contract. And as you saw in one of our metrics, only 1% of the time could they ask another agency to do it for them, because they are receiving the authority to transport in this county. Did I cover that? Was that?
I would add to that we're not talking about a huge amount of time. It's if fire arrives first, it's a matter of assessment and figuring out what's happening, and then Metro West rolls in. They work collaboratively together. So Tricia spoke to the shared training. We train together and they respond together. And then, once the person is packaged up, then Metro West takes them. Metro West also arrives first, and they will actively release fire from the scene. So they do work to reduce burden if it's unnecessary. If one arrives and there's not a transport necessary, or if Metro West arrives first. So they're a pretty connected group.
Any other questions, Commissioner?
Yeah, if we extend this contract, so it will add 18 months. So the next time the Metro West contract will be up for discussion will be 18 months from now.
Yeah, it extends the contract. The contract is a 6-year contract, so it adds 18 months back to the 6-year contract. The contract assessment period will always be 18 months, but there are plenty of opportunities to discuss contracts outside of those standards. Every one of our contracts has they can make a decision within a different time frame.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions, Chair.
So to be clear, you've made a recommendation to us, and unless I believe otherwise, then the extension, the 18-month extension on the existing 6-month contract continues. We don't have to take any other action.
It would come before your board in 2 weeks, so we have an agenda item set for you if you so wish us to bring that forward.
Okay, so I'm comfortable in this moving forward with that action. I do have a general question though, and I appreciate that Ms. Kyle reminded me that the EMS Alliance is looking at the contract period from our prior work sessions where I raised concern about evergreening contracts and wanting to see that they are at least revisited every decade or 2 decades for good public policy. I'm good with the EMS Alliance system in looking at that and bringing that back to us in the future. The question that I have today, and it's not about this specific 18-month review, but rather that we talk a lot about how Washington County, the community itself, evolves and continues to evolve. And here we are, we just completed a census year. I know we're all looking forward to some clarity, at least on when we're going to get the data out of that. And the current administration continues to be all over the place on what's happening in the status of affairs. So, but anyway, I digress. I'm interested in knowing, given my understanding of community composition changes, at what point are there multicultural assessments of the EMS service, the different kind of aspects you talked about, operations, communications, and clinical, has me thinking about there's the look and feel of these ambulance vehicles. So when someone is in crisis, all of a sudden these vehicles arrive, and then there's the feel of the service, and then there's the actual workforce and the multicultural composition of that. When do you ever do a assessment from, one census period to another, or from some set time frame to another, to get input from members of our community who are not of the white privileged aspect that I am?
That is certainly on the radar of the EMS Alliance. We personally, as staff, we would like any future contracts to hold some standards regarding diversity of staff. That's our personal goal as well as staff of Washington County. So we would be supplying the EMS Alliance with some suggestions and guidance for some of these opportunities that will be coming up as we work through first the ordinance documents, then the ASA, and then how does that impact a contract. So I appreciate your interest. We are on target with you. We have very similar interests in oversight of our program oversight.
Well, and I would be, I want to make sure that I've encouraged you and Ms. Angie so that other counties such as Multnomah County that have an appreciable multicultural ethnic composition are able to share best practices and continue to ensure that this really important ambulance service continues to evolve. I'm not trying to, I don't have any burning issue with it at all, but rather, how do we make sure that all of our community members feel well served, as you started this whole presentation with? So thank you very much for bringing that forward. Are all commissioners comfortable with this 18-month report and to have this action come to us in the next couple of weeks, as Ms. Mortel talked about? Okay.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Keep up the good work. All right, we have one more topic for our agenda today, our last one. It's on the Conciliation and Law Library financial update. And Miss Angie, before we start this, given the experience of earlier today, I asked before we started the EMS one, are the materials that we were provided with last night the same as what we now have in today's version of the packet?
Thank you for that question, Chair Harrington. Yes, they are. And Erin Calvert will be leading this discussion.
Terrific. Well, take it away, Erin.
Hi there. Thank you. Good afternoon and Happy New Year, Chair Harrington and Board of Commissioners, and welcome Commissioner Fye. I'm Erin Calvert with the County Administrative Office. And today I'm providing a financial update for the Conciliation Services and Law Library departments. This presentation is a collaboration of many, including Government Relations Manager Jajit Nagra, Conciliation Supervisor Cindy Carr, Juvenile Services Director Lynn Schroeder, Business Manager Cheryl Van Lack, Law Librarian Lee Van Duzer, and Support Services Finance Senior Management Analyst Judy Lynn. So a huge team working on this. And all of these subject matter experts are on Zoom today. Next slide, please. So the purpose, as mentioned, is to discuss the current funding formula as it relates to both departments as determined by the Board of Commissioners in 2012. And included in that agenda item in 2012 was a commitment from staff to update the board when the funding indicated it was time. Your packet for this work session included memos written by Cindy Carr for Conciliation Services and Lee Van Duzer for the Law Library that captured some historical information on funding and service delivery. We'll review briefly some of the parts of that, and then we'll walk through fund projections for both programs, looking at the current funding formula, as well as the projections if we were to return to state appropriations. And then we'll review next steps, any direction from your board, and questions, of course, from the board. Next slide. As we walk back through some of the history and how we got here, prior to 2011, both programs were funded by local court filing fees. In that, counties could adopt an increase in fees as it was needed to keep pace with inflation and the needed service delivery. And even in light of that, both departments ran a pretty lean and efficient program. In 2011, with 36 counties operating their own filing fee schedules, which I imagine created a somewhat inconsistent process, the legislature passed House Bill 2710, which changed the ability for local control and instead created the formula so that each county received a portion of the funding, which was based on a percentage of the filing fee revenue generated from the 2009 to 2011 biennium as a state appropriation. And while this may have delivered more consistency, there was some concern at the time that the funding allocated by the state wouldn't keep pace with the cost of delivering services to the community. And now, with the ability to look back over 10 years, the funding has held pretty steady despite the increased cost to both programs. But each year the gap gets bigger. Next slide. Then in 2012, Senate Bill 1579 passed, which is later codified as Oregon Revised Statute 9.829. This deferred the state funding allocations for conciliation and law library services to the Board of Commissioners, and specifically states that in partnership with the presiding judge, the allocation could include up to 1/2 of the monies distributed by the state for purposes of operating law libraries or providing law library services for the purpose of providing conciliation and mediation services in circuit court. So in April of 2012, in partnership with the presiding judge, conciliation services supervisor, and the law librarian, the county administrator asked the Board of County Commissioners to approve a funding formula that would combine the total state allocation and provide 60% of the allocation to conciliation services and 40% to the law library. This was passed by the board on consent agenda on April 3rd, 2012. Next slide, please. So at the time, this formula made sense for a couple of reasons. The law library had wisely built a fund balance that in 2012 had reached just over $1 million. And during that same time period, the state had continued to reduce conciliation services and had, in 2012, they had a 33% staff reduction and a 50% reduction in some of the contracted services. And again, this is a pretty lean department, so the reductions were quite significant. The chart on the slide illustrates the current formula with the fiscal year 2019-20 as a comparison. You can see on the left side of the slide, highlighted in green, what the state allocated to each department in fiscal year 19 and 20. The top numbers on the left side show the state allocation. And then the bottom part of the left side shows you what the departments received as their portion, given the policy of the 60-40% split. So highlighted in green, for example, is the state allocated amount of $490,486 to conciliation. And below that in green, the 60% of the total, which became $525,000 to operate the program. In comparison, on the right side of the chart is fiscal year 2021. You can see on the top right that the conciliation amount from the state was the same, $490,486 is highlighted in yellow. And as we know, the law library had a 25% reduction in state funding, making their total allocation $96,000 less than the previous year. Under our current funding formula with the 60-40% split, this had a couple of impacts. One, conciliation ended up with less money than the state allocated. This is illustrated by comparing the yellow highlighted number above with the yellow highlighted number below. This again is a reduction to conciliation when the state didn't actually make that reduction. And then two, this resulted in money actually flowing backwards from conciliation to the law library, which is illustrated by the law library state reduction equaling $289,000, but the formula providing an outcome allocation of $311,000. The statute doesn't account for the money to flow in this direction. Next slide. So for the 2012 consent agenda, staff indicated, as I mentioned, they would return to the board for an update and to potentially revisit the funding formula if and when the funding did become an issue. As you know, the state continues to keep the funding amounts fairly steady over the last decade, with exception to the current year's increase to the law library. The operating costs of both programs continue to increase. And while we wanted to bring this funding formula to your attention, whether or not your board determines it best to continue with the current funding formula or to return to state appropriations for both programs, the funding and the program continuation will remain a concern. Returning to state appropriations doesn't necessarily help each program sustain current service levels, but it does slow down the harm, and it will, the harm, if you will, sorry, for conciliation program to end this fiscal year, basically. Returning to state appropriations does decrease the impact of the state law library reduction to conciliation, and then it preserves their fund balance to help cover those reductions a little bit longer. And then just for the board's awareness, the return to state appropriations is supported by the current presiding judge, Beth Roberts. Next slide. So the next few slides are graphs that are broken down by program and by formula. This slide represents the conciliation services program starting in fiscal year 2009-2010. The blue bar indicates revenue, the orange bar represents expenditures, and the gray line represents the ending fund balance. And you can see that the current 60-40 formula split, conciliation is out of fund balance and their expenditures are projected to be more than the revenue after the end of this fiscal year. Next slide. So this slide represents the projections to conciliation services if the board determines it best to return to state appropriations. Essentially, the slide looks the same until you get to this current fiscal year, where you can see that the expenditures still outpace the revenue, but the fund balance carries the program for a little bit longer. This provides an opportunity to see what the state might do for funding, as well as give more time for the program to look at options around their continued service delivery. Conciliation is currently functioning with 4 full-time equivalent staff, which is the level of staffing they had in 2014. Next slide. Now we'll take a look at the law library projections under the current formula of the 60-40 split. This slide shows you again the blue bar representing revenue, the orange bar representing expenditures, and the gray line again representing the ending fund balance. You can see, as mentioned earlier, that the law library had built a substantial fund balance that reached around $1.1 million in 2012. The formula codified the intentional spend down of the fund balance, and quite frankly, the ability for both programs to continue their service delivery. It is worth noting that since 2012, the Law Library has contributed over $400,000 to the conciliation program as part of the formula distribution. Under the current formula, the Law Library will continue to utilize their fund balance to cover the gap between revenue and expenditures, and would be projected to be out of fund balance between fiscal year 2023 and 2024. Next slide, please. This slide illustrates the state distribution projections for the Law Library. This is using assumptions, of course, that we currently have. It doesn't reflect any additional reductions that we're aware of or additions by the state. If we return to this distribution, you can see that the Law Library's current service delivery could continue for a bit longer until fiscal year 24-25. Next slide. So the next steps, taking into account any additional direction given by your board, we of course will continue to provide legislative updates on state funding relative to conciliation and law library services. If your board wishes to change the funding formula, staff can bring a consent or action item forward as you direct. And as part of either scenario, we can incorporate a financial and a more detailed service level impact for the board for this next fiscal year relevant to conciliation services and the law library. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Commissioners, any questions or comments? I don't mind kicking off because I know I've got some, but go ahead, Jerry, Commissioner.
Well, I was just going to ask, so we don't have a staff recommendation on this because this is kind of confusing to me, and so I'd kind of like to have a staff recommendation.
Yeah, apologies. It's trying to give you a lot of information in a short amount of time, but yes, the staff recommendation is to, and this is inclusive of the departments, is to return back to state appropriations. It just gives us a little, not much, to be honest, just a little bit longer time to plan, to work with our legislature. And it also prevents money, as we indicated in the one slide, from kind of going backwards. You know, the amount right now that conciliation is getting from the state is actually less than what the state intended because of the way we, the Washington County, do our formula.
Okay, sounds good.
Chair Harrington, Commissioner Willie, if I can respond to that too. Changing the formula now allows the time for staff to bring forward a full budget picture coming into this budget session, because we know that there's other programs and services that are going to be impacted by state funding within the next couple months. You will hear additional updates, such as community corrections and what that impact is going to be. So bringing those forward within the budget as one package versus asking the board to make decisions that could have a cumulative impact is the reason for bullet point number 3 on this slide.
Thank you. It was really helpful to hear that answer to Commissioner Willie's question. Because it wasn't clear to me either. It is clearer to me now why you're recommending that we make this change to return to the state appropriation, because it gives us that extension of time while continuing to deliver services. The aspect of preventing money from going backwards, that statement doesn't make sense to me yet. I don't quite understand why that's a bad thing. It's not returning money to the state, is it? Or is it?
No,
it's
not
a weird
returning
term.
money.
So what? I don't understand it. I don't get it. Help.
It took me, will you go back? Is that slide 5? I can't remember if that's slide 5. Because it took me, you know, in talking with our law librarian, Lee Van Duzer, it took me a little while to kind of, I just kept focusing on conciliation is getting less than what the state intended.
So whoever drives the slides, if you could go back to slide 5.
I think it's 5. I'm kind of guessing off the top of my head because I don't have them in front of me. The one with the green and yellow, that one, yeah. So, and now my own face is in the way of the chart, but I was kind of thinking it's really conciliation getting less money from the state, which is one true. But if you look at what the state's intention with reductions were, the law library would have ended up with 286,000. Instead, because of the formula, they got a little bit more than what the state intended after their reduction. So maybe saying it went backwards just isn't the right terminology. They ended up getting additional money based on our formula.
So it sounds like you're highlighting that there's disproportionate impact.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, all right. I'm getting there. I'm getting
Yeah,
there.
and I think, you know, one point Judge Eat keeps helping me with too is, you know, as he talks with legislature, it's an interesting thing for him to talk about the reduction to conciliation because the state didn't reduce conciliation appropriation. So I think that's part of that formula unique to us as well in the way that he talks about it, because you can see by the appropriations on this page, they didn't reduce conciliation.
Okay. Wow, it's complicated, which for me, I need to learn more. So as staff, but also my colleagues have been hearing from me for a couple of years, I want to see that as we move forward as a county, that we are anchoring our service delivery aspirations and our actual service delivery more closely based to community need. And I appreciated that the packet included the historical document about conciliation history, as well as the memo. But frankly, I need more information. At this juncture, I am comfortable with making the temporary change that you are recommending, but I'm not willing to make it permanent, okay?
Understood, yes.
But in order to make it permanent, I do need you to continue with more of an assessment. And so let me give you a little bit of feedback about what I'm going to need beyond what's already provided. Okay. It was helpful, but not sufficient for me. It felt a bit incomplete. Yes, there were percentages, but there were multiple statements in both the historical summary as well as the memo that sounded like qualifiers. And I need to see more quantified data and more analytics to answer the questions about what is the case level? How many are return clients? And how many are new clients on a year-to-year basis over no more than 5 years? Okay. I appreciate that the commission made decisions and that you've given us information about 4 FTEs since 2014, but I have no way to anchor in my mind how the service delivery need has changed from 2014 to 2020. Now, I don't need to go back to 2014, just a 5-year window is more than enough. The information talked about domestic relations filing fees on page 3 of the document, and how there were special fund changes on page 4. But there was just a lack of really anchoring that in terms of service level. Now, the other thing that I really want to make sure is that, and I'm talking about the conciliation service.
I'm with you. Thanks.
What I really want to be able to do is to get a clearer picture of how our solutions, our services, are in the best interests of the children of our community, right?
Yep, we can do that.
So that's really why I'm looking for more data, better analytics. And I know the team has the ability to do that based upon the information you've already provided here. But I want to be more informed by that good information. And then on the law library side of things, I don't have enough information about the number of users, the hours of operation, the major categories of assets. You know, I know there's a conference room. I know that there are books. I know there's stuff online. There are online services. There are also, well, I'm not sufficiently anchored to have confidence that what I'm describing is correct.
You're on the right track, yes.
I feel like I have too many assumptions. And I know that each of these services, Conciliation and the Law Library, are important to portions of our community. So I remain committed to ensuring that we have those services. I also do want to be what's the word I'm looking for? You've provided a lot of historical context here. 2012 data, 2014 data, different House bills that affected. And I don't know how much of what we're doing or where we find ourselves now in this current biennium and then moving forward is we're dealing with unfunded mandates.
Right.
You know, I need to better internalize. You may have provided it, but I haven't internalized it yet. What are those required service capabilities? What additional ones we may provide for each of the law library and conciliation services? Because there are different grades of service level. At a minimum, we have to make sure, well, we have to make sure we hit the minimum, right, that we're required to do. But we may choose to keep or up level or remain or reduce our current service levels of different types within the two major categories. But I don't know enough yet about that. And I want to also get the benefit of our community. If we do leave things the same, or if we reduce, or if we increase, what is the outcome for our community? So really that's where I'm coming from.
That makes complete sense. Yeah, and it definitely, we knew we were missing some information on that, but to try to pile all that in the 30 minutes felt a little bit big, but I also see how just doing this in 30 minutes feels a little bit lacking. So we're ready to do that next step as the team I mentioned in the beginning and pull all that together and get that back to the board.
So I know that I am comfortable at this juncture in moving forward with your staff recommendation to temporarily return to that staff appropriation. Okay. I don't know if we'll be able to get to everything within this current next proposed budget year, but I would say that by the fiscal year after that, I want to make sure that we've been able to do that. So when I say temporary, I can go out beyond fiscal year 22.
So I could name the current fiscal year and the forward fiscal year and sort of make that a finite period so we know to revisit that in the time.
Yes, yeah,
okay,
yeah. Does that sound reasonable to my colleagues? We lost Commissioner Willie, did we? Okay, well, are my current commissioners okay with that idea? Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine. Sorry, I had a little dog issue I had to take care of real quick. So.
Oh, we didn't get to enjoy your coworker. Darn.
Chair Harrington, in terms of mechanics, does the board prefer that as a consent agenda item like it came before, or is there preference for an action item or something different? In 2012, it was consent, so I just wasn't sure this board's preference.
Well, for myself, on this, you know, consent really is routine business, and changing funding models isn't necessarily routine, but a concise action presentation that just illustrates that we do have a funding problem. The staff recommendation is to make a temporary funding change while we buy ourselves more time to do a service level analysis.
That makes sense. Thank you. I'll do that.
Commissioner Willie, are you okay with that as well? Okay. I just think it goes to our transparency.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
Agreed.
Cool. Any other questions or comments on this item? Nope, don't see any. All righty. Well, thank you, Ms. Calvert.
Thank you for your time.
Commissioners, do you have any last items for today's work session? You know, it's been an exciting but a long day. Seeing none, leadership, do you have anything more for us today? No? Okay, well then we'll see one another bright and shiny at 10 o'clock on Thursday for our roundtable. Terrific. Thank you, everyone. Really jam-packed first meeting day as the board. Thank you, everyone. It's been a great day.
Right.
Take care.
Thank you, commissioners. Have a wonderful evening.
You too.